Good evening and welcome to the Spirit of Motorsport TV. And tonight's special is, of course, with the great Roy Moore and Barry Wood, all about the Manx Grand Prix and a classic TT. It is once again an interactive show, so feel free to send your questions our way. And remember, for future reference, for any shows that are coming up, you can join us live in the studio. You can join our guests and you can ask them any question that you have ready and waiting for them. So I'm going to welcome in the great Barry Wood and Roy Moore to the studio. Welcome, chaps.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. On a significant date, 1st of September. Probably in past years, there'd be people celebrating wins in the Manx Grand Prix on the 1st of September. But there's a significant birthday yesterday for Mr. B. Wood. But there was also announced today that it was Barry Gibbs' birthday. Man who was born on the Isle of Man and who resided at the post office at Union Mills. So a bit of a significant contribution there to start it all off. And I'm sure he would have listened to the bikes going round. Well, he couldn't do much else, really, could he? Even if they weren't interested, they would be hearing them going past, nipping the old gable of the mills on the left-hand side.
That's right.
And then going past the post office there where his father was in charge of it. So, yeah, nice little start, that, a bit of a connection. But the Manx Grand Prix has got plenty of history. The classic TT, maybe not so much, but we're going to kind of reflect on them through your questions. And if anybody else has got any questions, we'll do our very, very best to answer them here in the Isle of Man, which would have been looking forward to the second race day. But the weather forecast for tomorrow is very, very poor. I think we would have got away with it on Saturday night, and then they would have had the second of the classic contribution, and then the newcomers would have been out last night, and it was quite a nice night, Barry, for doing that.
It was on my mind all day yesterday that you would have had your two classic races and then an hour break and then the newcomers race, which would have been fantastic. It's always a fantastic event. It's an emotional event. And the weather was perfect. And lots of people were saying to me, even last night, wouldn't it have been brilliant? Where would you have been watching and stuff like this, you know? And also just saying there, Roy, as well, the Manx Grand Prix was always known as the September races, the locals. And even older people now still say the September races. As the times have moved on, it's been brought into August, and very often the last race is on the 30th or 31st of August, but traditionally it was the September races. So.
And the seniors, you still hear a lot of people talking about the seniors, don't you, and calling it the seniors.
Well, you still got the class names, you know, but there's this, just, I don't know. It's just, it was always, the thing is, the Manx Grand Prix as well, actually could run into the 11th, 12th, 14th of September years ago. Some of the old dates you got. So it was very, very dark for morning practice back in those days, because it started at 6 o'clock now.
And so what birthday did we have you celebrating yesterday, Barry? 21 again?
I don't celebrate birthdays, and I never
I did.
If the old rules would have still been there when you were too old to do the Manx, I would have been drummed out nearly 20 years ago. Put it that way.
That'll be it then.
Yeah.
So he was 60.
Happy birthday to you.
The novelty's worn off a long time ago. It was good actually to go up the pub last night, but not that you need one when you're on holidays anyway. But, yeah. But Ralph Sutcliffe we were talking about. Ralph. Same day as me. There's a lot of me, of course, you know.
All right, great. Awesome. Amazing. Guys, we've already got some comments. I'm just going to quickly share them with you. So we've got Luke Blevins is saying, does Roy prefer the TT or the Manx and Classic?
Oh, well, Manx Grand Prix, always have, always will do for whatever's left for me and for the event, which is unpredictable as in life. But at the same time, certainly the Manx Grand Prix holds an awful lot more memories through my career, through my life, really, from a very, very early age. And bearing in mind, as I think we have mentioned before, that was family connection with my Uncle Jack actually competing in it, which gives it that extra little bit of a kick anyway. But certainly the friendships you make through Manx Grand Prix, far superior than any you would make through TT, and even kind of less now. You know, you've still got the Manx Grand Prix, you've still got them in the tents, you can still go round. They're absolutely delighted to talk about anything. And if they do get a mention on the radio, well, then so be it. It's because you've done a little bit of research and got some points towards it. Whereas maybe others in other events expect it and get kind of clobbered to say the right things about everything. But then again, there probably will be a check at the end of it. So with the Manx Grand Prix, the boys arrive and they go back and they just enjoy that fortnight, and immediately they go back, they're making plans for the following Manx Grand Prix.
And there's no start money, there's no prize money, anything like that. It's absolutely all for the sport, the Manx Grand Prix. The good thing for locals as well, they very often know somebody who's racing. It might be somebody who they work with, somebody who gets in the local pub the odd time. Certainly in my case, as a young boy, my Coleman was a Manx Grand Prix rider, a fella who could come round to fix a broken tap with the corporation, was doing the Manx Grand Prix in the early 70s. Just real people, you know, and anybody who wins the Manx, like I said, there's no money involved. You spend a lot of money to entertain people, but I think in fairness with TT winners, it's yes, they want to win. They've got a great passion to win, but it's their job to win. Do you understand what I mean by that? Whereas whoever wins the Manx, it's a major thing in life to do that, or even just to finish anyway is a major thing. That was the thing with this newcomers race, which would have happened yesterday. Just to take part in that race, you've got nowadays only maybe about 20 or 30 odd people, but in the past over 100 people realizing life ambitions, not just to race on the course, but to actually take the checkered flag and to see some of the winners at the end of it. It's very emotional, actually. It has a whole special ethos, which you don't really find at the TT the same. So I would say Manx Grand Prix for me. I've always loved the TT, but the TT now is not what it used to be, if I can put it that way politely.
The Manx Grand Prix and the Classic just seems to have so much more rawness to it, doesn't it? Heart, soul, and
just
rawness.
Real people.
Yeah. All right, we've got some more comments, boys. So we've got John O'Sullivan saying 2 legends. I totally agree. Then we have howdy from America from John Koshersky. I think I say your name right, John. I think I've just about got that right. And it's not the same. Martin Edwards says the Manx isn't the same now. It's got to evolve though, boys, hasn't it? Barry, what are your thoughts on that?
It's not the same as it was because it's having to muck in with another meeting, I think, which has a different kind of an organization. There may be different people at the helm who have a passion for the classic TT rather than the Manx Grand Prix. And I always said that once the last classic race finished, they'd have an hour break, then the newcomers race. The whole mood changed dramatically from that to the Manx. I always felt that it's not as easy now at the Manx Grand Prix to get as much practice as you used to get. Not only can they obviously not have morning practices now, but they're fitting in with the classic TT. It's not as it was, but it could have been a lot worse. There was a lot of trouble a few years ago to try and get to this. A lot of people worked very hard even to get what we have now. And thankfully, we still have the senior, the junior, the lightweight, the ultra lightweight. We've still got our newcomers race. And we have to be thankful for that in this day and age. But I think the actual atmosphere of the Manx, once the Manx kicks off, is as good as it ever was.
And there's a question here from Terence Cartwright. Before we do move on to some of your great mountain memories, guys, question for Barry Wood. Is there anything you would like to see happen to keep the Manx Grand Prix original? What would it be?
I wouldn't be allowed to really mention that on a program like this, but I just wouldn't like to see it change too much more. I mean, there's been some changes in the last year or two, which I might not necessarily agree with. I personally don't like newcomers coming back into it. Once the idea was always once you'd won, you moved on. But now newcomers can come back. I'm not actually a fan of that, and I don't know why that was established, but it is, and you have to accept it. That's just one thing. I would like to see bigger fields at the Manx Grand Prix, Terence, to be honest with you. You know, going back years ago, it's all to do with insurance and things. I think they can't have the fields they used to. But I have a Manx Grand Prix program now from back in the 80s. And even the newcomers race went up to number 112. It's unbelievable that could happen. But it did, right, didn't it, every year? They were big fields.
Yeah.
And even the other classes as well, they were big fields. I would like to see things like that happen, to be honest, but it's not going to happen anymore. It's a case now with health and safety and insurance, I suppose, to get what you can out of it. But as long as there's not too many more changes, I might keep us going for the next 10 years or so.
Starting in pairs was always the case. And then obviously something came up where they were only to start in single start. And that automatically limited the field, going back to it happened to us type of thing. My lads started in kind of last place in the Senior Manx Grand Prix. And I think at the time, Mikey Evans, who was up at the front, would be a couple of years ago, it was on the second lap that he caught him up. But by the same time, you can't do anything about that. If you're starting at 10-second intervals, you've only got, for the field of about 80 maximum, I think they can have, it's about 11 or 12 minutes. Somebody worked it out the other day on our site, and it was quite interesting that they're starting at 12 minutes after the first man away, and it's seeded so that the first men away are the quickest, whereas the last, even though they're lapping at 110, 112 these days, they're the slow men of the group. And you didn't have a problem with it with pairs, but now with single start, you're never going to have 100 starting singly because it's not physically possible. So it's just another kind of thing that has happened to it with the health and safety side of it. And but that is kind of set in stone now that it's going to be single, and probably the limit will be starters, maybe 80 in total.
I think when they used to have the numbers up to 116, 117, the senior occasionally did start as singles, but the last man got away at 18 minutes, 20 seconds. So that happen nowadays. The fast men are lapping in 18 minutes anyway, so that couldn't happen. But even so, people are still going to be overtaken on the course, passing people and being passed by people. It's safety to the nth degree, isn't it? I mean, the numbering system now seems to be, well, you know, I've lapped in 19 minutes 28, but you lapped in 90 minutes 28.4, so you're slower than me. You should be behind me for safety's sake. Do you understand me? I find things. There again, they have to slot newcomers in, and at other times as well. They've got to go in there with numbers. You don't know what they're going to lap at when they get the numbers. But you see, the thing with lots of races now is the first load are seeded at the 20 odd. It doesn't matter what number you're at, it goes on your practice time anyway. And I think that's another thing which has taken away the excitement of sitting on the hedge watching the races in the traditional manner and taking your numbers down in the program as you came past, following the race that way. I think there's an assumption now, well, people don't watch it like they used to. They film it, or they take photographs, or they watch it on their computer. But there's an awful lot of people who do it the proper way. Now you can't follow the race the same. You know, number 1 to 20 goes past, and then number 61 comes past. You go, oh, he's doing well. But he started in 21st place. Just different. Not the way I particularly like it, actually, but not much I can do about it. It's the new way.
Early days of commentary, that was the big thing, really. If they were starting as they were allocated numbers, you were looking out then for the higher numbers to come through. And certainly in my very early kind of years with the 80s, you would, all the numbers were jumbled up anyway, and it was a nightmare sometimes to stay on air to get the race leader through. I think Mike, there was one in 84 or 85, was it McSkeen or somebody that there was lapping, like at 110, I think his number was. In fact, I think there's a picture. Was it Jeff Johnson? We'll have a look through while Barry matters on. But
There was one race in particular I remember. I would say the 75 senior, give or take a year. And Keith Trubshaw, who's quite well known on the Isle of Man, a great racer, a former travelling marshal for many years. He was the last man away, number 117. And I think he finished about 14th on the road or something like that. But it was a 6-lap race, and the winner, or the first man, came in and he held him. And so we have to wait till Trubshaw gets in. But he's through Carmichael. Nowadays you might have to wait 20, 30 seconds, but that's how the numbering system was. I thought it was quite exciting myself. And there was another one that was a double win in the Manx Grand Prix 65, and the same rider was number 11 in one race in the junior, say, and 111 in the senior. He won both races. One was dry, one was wet. Now that can never ever happen again. But obviously for him, 2 different experiences. And the went on to win 2 TTs, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
Uphill,
yeah. Jeff Tanner, we had a thing on. He started at number 1 in the junior, and then started at number 104 in the senior and did the double. And we weren't far away. The year was 1980. Jeff Johnson won the senior, riding at number 110.
That's it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right, boys. Well, we've got loads of questions. What we're going to do is we're going to come back to the questions and just go through some of the... So you've kindly given us access to your Mountain Memories page, which we all know and love. And we've pulled some of our favourites from the Manx Grand Prix that you've got on there. So you've agreed to share some of your stories that are linked to them. So we're going to start with Alan Holmes in 1957. Now, Roy, I know this is a big one for you, and well, for both of you, for being Manxman and the first Manxman to do the double in the Manx Grand Prix. Love this article, love the story. So tell us a bit how special it is for you to see that, Roy.
Well, you've got to be realistic. In 1957, I would be 10 years of age. So it would start off as it did in 54 with Manxmen. I think we've recalled Derek Ennett and George Costain and the stories that went with their wins in the Manx Grand Prix. But for a Manxman to do the double, well, that was on, it just didn't kind of enter the equation. Don Crossley was classed as a Manxman, even though he was from Yorkshire, and he came close to it. But the thing about Alan Holmes, he's still alive and still very active as well. And his son, David Sort Holmes, I think it is, he's a regular contributor to the Roy Moore and Barry Wood site and keeps it all up to date. But when you're thinking back, I can remember going up to Farragher's and Ashton's for the weigh-in, and it became probably my favourite colour. He had an orange crash hat, the pudding basin type that they are shown there on the start line up at Glencrutchy Road. And straight away, you see the significance there. He's at 83. So it probably would have been a practice like that, because back in the background there's number 3.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be starting a race on that particular occasion. But again, the talk in the house, if you can imagine Jeff Cannell, Jack Cannell, his father, an only child, they never talked about anything else. It was all motorbikes. And we had a magic spell around that time when my grandmother wasn't very well, and there was a lot of family disruption, which you didn't know why. You were suddenly getting farmed out at Auntie Jessie's, where Jack and Jeff were based, and then suddenly you were with another auntie somewhere else. It was all a bit complicated. I can understand it now, but at the time when you're only 7, 8 years of age, it's very difficult to kind of dial in. But every bit of conversation, although you weren't listening to some of it, you picked up. And Alan Holmes became like an instant. He was from Castletown, so he was a true Manxman in every respect. The family connection was there. You know, and I remember his brother was a good golfer down in Ramsey, and there's other offspring from that as well. Coming out of the dip at Governor's Bridge there, you know, the old Governor's Bridge as we know it, the blue thing in the background, even though it's a black and white photo, that was the only way that the police in the Isle of Man could get contact back to the station. So if they were chasing a hardened criminal down Glencrutchery Road on foot, they would stop, open the box with their special key, and then dial through to the police station, which was down in Athol Street, to say they had a bit of a problem. There was another one in Prospect Terrace. But look at the lack of trees in the dip itself. Now it's our main thoroughfare to get to Onken and the north.
Well, there was a pillar box just out of sight here as well, wasn't it? Just
yeah.
where the wall disappears on the left, there was a pillar box.
Yeah.
Imagine getting out there now to post a letter these days.
Yeah.
Take you right with your hand.
I've been sat in with Uncle Jack when he's been posting a letter, and there wasn't such a thing as I was getting out and do it. He would drive up to the letterbox there because you could. There was hardly any other traffic on the road, and he was an engineer, so he always had a car, no matter what it was. It wasn't a new one, so you'd all pile in the back and you'd go out on a Sunday. But he's just got to post a letter, and the next thing he'd be scratching in round where that post box was, just winding the window down and shoving the letter through, and then taking off again.
Yeah.
And we had an article on about it, and there was a fella from Steve Parker from Ramsey said, well, look at the one on May Hill. As you come out of May Hill, there's one on the left-hand side, just where George Formby went round the lamppost. He said, we used to do that. There's a very good, from my era as well, all the people from round about, Ernie Washer on the right, Alan Holmes it was an unknown person, but that wasn't for any other reason that she was some form of beauty queen. That was
Miss Alaman, apparently. Miss Alaman.
MISSILE, Miss Alaman. And she was on the island. She was on the island and got dragged up to add a bit of glamour. Ernie Washer, he went on to win after Alan Holmes and narrowly missed avoiding dog on Glencrutchery Road. But the man on the left on a Norton there was another thing that cropped up today. I'm sure that possibly will be, and we know it's Bob Doughty, and there's a Bob Doughty Jr. who's very, very much contributes to our page as well. And we were talking about names of bikes. Barry put an article on about names of bikes, and that one there, number 75, was kept at the bottom of the stairs in Castle Hill, Doughty's Works, down there where Reg Dearden and the boys used to come to fettle their bikes. And it was affectionately known as Sally. It was christened Sally when they bought it, and Sally it was for the rest of its life. And Bob didn't get the win on it, but I think he was third in that particular race. So more Manx history, Hailey.
Well, the bike went,
love it.
didn't it, to the States or Canada or somewhere, but not for many years or many months. It was all done up there.
Yeah, we really refettled.
I, in later years, had the chance to actually ride that bike. It was one of the greatest experiences I ever had, but it was terrifying because I rode Bob's son's bikes in the Classic Manx 700 and other road races. He went up to JB one day. Bob's dad wanted to run the bike, and then young Bob rode the bike, and I thought, God, he's so lucky. And the next thing he said to me, right, come on, and it's your turn. And I was terrified because of the amount, what it cost to get this bike built again. And that I thought, if I do something wrong with bend a valve, I'm in deep trouble, right? But I had about 3 runs up and down on a genuine, authentic Manx Norton, and it was a great experience. I can never thank them enough for that. So
wow.
Alan, before I just leave Alan Holmes, it's before my time, obviously, but I did meet Alan Holmes a few years ago. I went out to St. John's, and it was a photograph exhibition, and a few people were pointed out to me, and I recognised Alan Holmes, and he was about a little bit he couldn't hear what I was saying very well, man. You lots of people are the same when they're talking to me.
What you saying?
Yeah. I had a good chat with him, and it's very much been my mother's era. She knew a lot of the lads in the south of the island who were racing back in the 50s. So a name I was brought up with, certainly, Alan Holmes. Yeah. And
he's still about.
Yeah.
And long may it continue.
Exactly.
Fantastic. How old is he now?
Oh, dear me. He must be 80, 83, 84. I might be doing injustice, might even be more.
I would say 90, because if he won it at 57, so he
57.
would be 3 years older than my dad. I would say he would be in the 85 to 90 bracket.
Yeah, probably will. Yeah.
And if somebody tells him what we've said and he's not that old, we'll get a mouthful here.
Get a bollock.
Yeah.
All right, boys. So we're going to move on to the next one, if that's all right. And it's what I love about your page is, like you said, people will share content, but then I saw Patricia Kelly and she reached out on the page because she wanted content. She was seeking content on Mike Kelly, wasn't she? Who's 1963 Manx Grand Prix. And she wanted to get some pictures, and she come across this. She eventually shared, didn't she? And I love that, how if somebody's trying to reconnect with a memory, a previous experience, or even someone they might have raced with or saw race, they can come onto your page and at some point they can find something, which I think is it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to give your fans. So anyway, Patricia's come on here and she shared this. She called it a crumpled old piece of paper. You want to share the story, Barry, if you could? That'd be amazing.
Well, straight away you can see the pillar box I just mentioned. So this looks to me like it could well be the first lap of the race, and Griff has maybe caught Mike there. With maybe 10 or 20 seconds on that, would you say?
Yeah, probably around about that.
One of the first two laps, anyway. Yeah. Mike Kelly, again, slightly before my time, but I can remember him more as an official at the back of the grandstand at the Manx Grand Prix with the green and yellow coat on and the armband. And he often used to drive the roads open car and things like that. But again, he always spoke to me mum. All those riders in the 50s knew her, but would have a chat with her. Patricia herself, she wrote a book years ago. Which was all about Knockalo and an internee who was there, and a young girl from Patrick Village befriended him. She wrote that book, and I think she's redoing it again. But it was only in latterly that I realised it was the same lady who had emigrated and who was Mike Kelly's wife. So small in a way, but.
In Australia at the moment, I mean, as far from the Isle of Man as you could get, really. We're kept up to date by the goings on, and he had a bit of a fall, and it's affected his movement a little bit. But she does quite openly say that some day his memory is good, and he wants to talk about it, and other days his memory isn't so good, and he's not interested, which I suppose is a fact of life, really, as you get older. But again, he came into the era too. Again, when we say about Reg Dearden, he was a prolific owner of Manx Nortons, and he was keen to help the Manx lads out. And Colin Broughton, Mike Kelly, Dennis Christian, who's just recently left us, and they all became Bob Doughty and others as well, Randall Cowell over the years. And they all became kind of legends for a fortnight when they rode in the Manx Grand Prix. They had a hard time getting qualifications to get into the Manx Grand Prix because they had to do a certain amount of race meetings, and that was why the Southern 100 came about down there at after the success of George Costain and Derek Ennett. They formed the Southern 100 to give them qualification for the Manx Grand Prix. But there was all kinds of fellas. Ken Taubman was another one that springs to mind as being there, and the Clubman's attracted quite a few as well. Ray Kelly, he rode in a Clubman's round the Clips course that was only held for 1 year, But the photos that we've posted on, it's been terrific, the response, because you don't know what you get. Some don't get response, some just fall by the wayside because nobody's interested. But you go back into that era, and even so, we put some on there the other day about 1984 or 5, I think it was. Buddy Yeardsley was there congratulating the winner of the junior, which would have been held on the Tuesday, Gary Ratcliffe. And then later in the week, it was Buddy Yeardsley who won the senior. And that there, and I think there was another Manx success that somebody came second, I think, in one of the races as well, the lightweight or something like that. And just that instant photograph that you put on, which brings back so many memories. Moving film doesn't appeal to me, I must admit. You've got to go through a process of putting a disc on and scratching about and then watching it until the moment arrives. But the photos that we've had the privilege of getting put on and putting on ourselves just capture atmosphere in every respect, whether it be TT or Manx Grand Prix.
Was that the Ian Ogden was second in the Manx?
Could well have been.
He was second one.
He checked it up.
Oh, he was
and yeah, that would be it.
So
that's what, Barry. Will I check that one out?
I have a look at this, yeah.
So 1974, boys, this is Bob Jolly, Australian Manx Grand Prix newcomer. So he's been presented with a £50 check to help him with his expenses. So back in 1974, like, to bring himself all the way over from Australia to compete in the Manx Grand Prix, that's a hefty sum, isn't it, to be able to get himself over to that? But then to get some kind of assistance, it must have meant a lot to him.
Yeah, the Laxey and Lonnon licensees, and there was lots of this kind of thing where it went on the Isle of Man during the winter time for the Manx Grand Prix. I mean, the Foresters Arms used to do it. I think the Crosby Hotel used to do something like that. Lots of other places as well. I don't know the exact criteria, but I assume that Laxey and Lonnon licensees chose a recipient from the Manx, probably a newcomer, and looked at his circumstances and made a decision who to give it to. And because there weren't that many overseas riders back in those days doing the Manx, we'd be doing the TT. So it was a big thing, really. And £50 nowadays is nothing really. But back at that time, I would say the entry fee for the Manx sport would be about 20 quid then or something like that.
Yeah, probably would be around about that. So
and in 1974, what would you have been earning for a week's pay? Probably not even that. So it would be a great help to him, I'm sure. I was fishing around to try and find anybody who was there that night. I do know somebody who was there, but to be honest, but Big Spud Neil was down.
Yeah.
But I don't know how long that went on for now, but I remember it happened to Bob Jolly, and I found a picture the other night, and I thought, well, we'll stick that up. And it's amazing how that the way we're doing this thing, that you get the next generation, or even the next generation after that, somebody could come on and say, "Oh my God, that's my granddad. Where did you get that from?" This happens time and time again. People will say to us, "My granddad did the Manx Grand Prix in 1973 and he was 6th or something like that." And I'll say, "Well, what's his name?" And you might just have a picture next to you or a story about him. And this is what it's all about, the memories, just keeping these names going.
We've got a comment here from Carlos Semford. I'm not quite sure. He was saying Barry Wood used to collect for riders when he was young. Ask him about that. It was in the papers a few times. Total enthusiast.
Yeah, it was my mum's idea, but she suggested it. There was always somebody had some bad luck in practice week. This was TT, not Manx, actually. But back in those days, privateers were skinned. You know, it's not quite the same with the TT now. But back in those days, somebody always had a bike blow up in the last practice session, couldn't race, or had an accident or whatever it was. And the first year we did this was 1976, and we raised 20 quid. And what we actually did, I don't know if you know Williston well, where we walked 30 times around the block. So people were saying a penny a lap, so 30 pence or 60 pence. And we also had a jumble sale in the back garden. I mean, my mum made cakes and ice lollies and things like this. So firstly, we got 20 quid. That went to a rider called Dave Danks. And what happened to Dave Danks was, in the last practice session, another rider came steaming into the pits far too fast, crashed into Dave Danks and burned his bike out. And £20 was neither here nor there, but it was the gesture, so we did that. The next year, 1977, we raised £70. That went to Bill Simpson, who crashed on the last lap at the Nuke. That's Ian Simpson, TT Star's dad. And we actually saw the yellow flags with him. And we'd heard of no bad luck stories that year, so we said, well, give it to Bill Simpson. He would have got £400 prize money, which he didn't get anything, obviously. 78, we raised £106, and that went to top Japanese rider Takazumi Katayama, who stopped in the 78 senior race when Pat Hennon had a major accident while racing for the lead. And because he stopped to help out, he missed his replica and everything. So he got that. 79, we got £163.50. So it's going up all the time. We didn't walk any more for it. Life was just yeah. And that there was a big sidecar crash at Bedstead Corner in practice, which we saw, an Irish crew. Horrible to see, but because there was no other bad luck stories, we agreed that we would like to give them the money to try and get them out in the race, which we actually did. And that was a guy called Bob Mullen from County Dublin, who in later years was the sponsor of one of my heroes, Danny Shimon. Danny was riding Bob's bikes in the classic races, and they were a big team, RM Racing. So it came full circle, but I met Bob many years later. And what I said to him about the time we gave him the money at the TT, he remembered it, but he hadn't a clue that it was me who did it. So, yeah, that's what we did. We never had really time to go breaking into places or beating people up. Too busy raising money for TT riders. So.
Oh, literally. Just when you were saying there, Hailey, I've had the privilege of reading this book. It was dropped into me by Sean Fox, who was Frank Fox's dad. And I've just completed reading it. We put a little article on there to say how enjoyable it was. But there is a passage in there where Frank came to ride in the TT and his helmet, his crash hat, was condemned. And he said, well, that's it. I'm finished now. I haven't got the money. They were on the backsides with regards. Everything had to be budgeted. And there was no money available anywhere for a crash hat. And Nick Jeffries' dad, the senior, came along and said, don't worry about it, and took him down to Gilbert Harding's, which was the dealers at the time, and actually allowed for a new crash hat to be bought. And the story goes that he always had a little fox on the front of his hat. And this photograph inside of Crunknamona hasn't got the fox on the front. And certainly it came about that then he related the story that was bought for him. And Alan Jeffries, you've taken ages to try and think. Alan Jeffries, who was the chief scrutineer then, just made that little gesture to it. And it's little things like that have gone on over the years, which in books or whatever it is. Yeah, just another story from the Isle of Man.
Beautiful. Love it. We've got Mick Chatterton, who says, boys, that he comes over and sees Alan quite regularly, and he can affirm that he's 90 years young. 90 years young. Keep your comments coming in, everybody, and your questions, and we'll do our very best to share it with the boys. We have Gail Core here, says, love the Bob Mullen story, Barry. Amazing memories both have. Brilliant. So we're going to come back to the Bud Jackson story, if that's okay. So 1986, we've got some shots there of him, and it made me smile. I'm sure it's made a few people smile. And Bud's got a real cheek. Look at that burnt bum.
Well,
So fill us in.
I know a little bit about that. I mean, it's not a pretty sight. You have to be realistic. We remember Bud with so much affection. Well, 365 days every year, there'll be something that will crop up because they spent so much time out in the garage just on my left here. So I can picture him getting the key off the hook there to open the door in our yard and go in there and all the stuff. And they set it. He had sponsorship in '86, and I was on to my second year, I think it was, at Ballacrane. And it's one of the most memorable things you can do. But they set the bike up, and there was all kinds of things that went on in setting the bike up, which were kind of connected, if you know what I mean. And he wasn't destined to win, really. I would say Ralph Sutcliffe would probably be the favourite to win. Because just going back to what we were saying before, it was him who'd finished up in that newcomers race that we were the lightweight in 1985. Ralph had got the runner-up spot, and would you believe Carl Fogarty was third in that race? So it was a pretty competitive outing. And then Bud just got into the groove and all that, but the suspension was too soft on it, and the back tire actually went through the seat, and obviously you can see the result of the damage on the bumpier parts of the car, probably from Ginger Hall to Ramsey, would have been an absolute nightmare. But it cured his constipation. There was no problem about that.
That was 86 Junior.
86 Junior, yeah. And then he came over to do as the tradition was, and we kept in touch, obviously, because it was we didn't see him then until they get invited, or they didn't get invited to the dinner to say a few words. And he had a real play on that when he was making a speech about how everybody wanted to see what the damage was to his leathers and stuff like that. And there he was displaying all his attributes. And that was it. They were condemned, the leathers, after that. But Bud went on to have some good battles with Barry in the 250 Classics in later years too, and they were great friends. And he's very sadly missed.
Well, the first time I ever met Bud, I had worked hard all winter to lose some weight, and I got right down to under 10 stone. I'd never actually met Bud before. I raced against but never met the man, and he said, "Hey, fatty." That was the very first time he ever spoke to me. Hey, fatty. But great friends. Had a lot of good racing together.
Yeah, but you did Ireland as well, so it became that we've just lost another 250 competitor, really, in Jeff Ward. And the stories that have been circulating about the friendship between them all, and they would go to Ireland and ride in the 250 Classic races over there and have a good time, and it was all part and parcel of it. And certainly I never got the opportunity to meet Jeff, but certainly when it came, he was a winner down at the pre-TT Classic down at Balaun, Colas Balaun, my apologies. And yeah, you would know him quite well, wouldn't you? And they were all one for one and all for one. If you wanted a clutch for a 250 Suzuki and they had a spare one, it wasn't a case of saying, "Oh, if I hold back and don't give it to him, I might move up another position in the running order."
Oh, absolutely nothing
like that
no.
at all.
All of those, anybody really involved in that sort of racing, are just real people, really enthusiasts. Money doesn't come into it at all. And these characters have gone, unfortunately, Haven't that class is gone, hasn't it, really, now, Roy? It's a shame that, that era has gone. Yeah. But these people were still around, and certainly, like you say, in the Irish road races or at Balaun, they would be the same ones there year after year after year. They were still very competitive people and still great friends.
Competitive, but still family. It's a chosen family, really, isn't it? That's what's the family vibe.
Yeah.
Sidecars are in the same ilk. Sidecar boys in the old. Maybe you wouldn't get it. There was the works teams, and then there was everyone else in the TT. Everyone else helped one another out. The works team would cut one another's throat to get the win. And there's been many things. We did something there that I didn't even know. Honda had a black protest over Graham Crosby getting allowed to start at the back of the grid and coming through to win. So in tribute to what they described as the arc thing of the ACU and allowing it to happen, they painted all their leathers black and did all the fairings on the bikes black. The year escapes me, as it does.
81, that was.
81. I know where I was watching. And they went out on the Friday, Alex George, Ron Howland, and who was the other one that was with them? Alex George, Joey Dunlop, all in these black leathers. And then we picked up an article that they were made by Mr. Taylor from Manx Leathers over here, but he only had dark blue leather. So he took them to Prince's Motors in Laxey and had them sprayed and sprayed in black. And that was the way that they went, just with the place on their back for the numbers, just like the old days. And that was all through because of the rivalry between Suzuki, Yamaha, Honda, all the top boys. There was no kind of tanks that were putting fuel in quicker than others were developed. And then they banned them as well because it gave them an advantage. So,
well, there were lots of protests at that time too, wasn't there?
Protests going in.
There was T-shirts, was it Honda wins, Suzuki protests and stuff.
Yeah.
And I can remember reading that the Villa at the presentation, there was quite a hostile atmosphere at times when there'd been some protest put in. That would never happen in our side of the thing, you know.
There was our kind of Manxman that we hold on to, Bruce Anstey's mother lived in the Isle of Man, and there was an absolute fraction of a thing on a cam, and he was denied the win over it. And Tony Scott was the man who developed the engine, and he, kind of said, I've made a mistake, but it's not a mistake really, because it was so minute. But they picked up on that and disqualified him. And you have to think that sometimes it's because, not of the person, it's because of the fact that he's on a certain make of bike. And just these things have happened. Politics, aren't they called?
Politics. We have Nigel Conray commenting here, boys, saying great stories and memories, chaps. Hello, Nigel, all the way over in the US, I believe.
No, Nigel's one of our admins, actually. He is man. He's very creative. Hi, Kenny.
As a Manx fellow would say, he's pomegranated to America.
He's the car at the moment. That's what we haven't heard from him.
Is he?
He's all over America following the NASCAR races.
That's I randomly met him at a NASCAR race when I was in America a few years ago, and I didn't even know. It's really bizarre. Nice to see a Manxie there.
Lots of terrific photographs come from Nigel, and you go through the old TT programs, the old ones, not the glossy things that they have now, where they highlight about 6 riders and then that's the end. In the old days, when you had stories and input and all that, Nigel Conrad is probably one of the most prolific contributors to that source.
Brilliant. So coming back to the international riders, boys. So Barry, we've got a picture here from 2015. So there was a Japanese rider. So forgive me, I get this wrong. Masayuki. Is on the Masayuki with his translator, right? And then Victor Lopez as well. So you guided these boys around the track, teaching them the course. Is that correct?
I did meet them both at different times. Victor came over probably in the springtime off his own bat, I think, at that time. Or maybe he was through the Mike Haywood Foundation to do lots for newcomers. But I met him and took him around. He was really easy to chat to. He spoke perfect English, and it was quite a simple job with him. But I had to meet the other gentleman. What's his name? Masayuki. I had to meet him, and I was warned in advance. He doesn't speak any English, so always up for a challenge. I met him, and the gentleman on the right in the blue coat, he came along as well. He did speak English. So starting from scratch, I thought, how are we going to do this? I said, does Masayuki understand the terms peel off and apex? So he yapped on for about 2 minutes in Japanese and lots of hands flapping around, and he goes, yes. So here we go. And then everything I said, this gentleman on the right listened intently, and then he conveyed everything in Japanese to the rider, who had a massive big foolscap writing pad and a pencil, not a pen, a pencil, and he scribbled away like a secretary, and it was all in Japanese italics. And then he'd finish that page and he'd rip it open for the next one, and then we'd have to stop somewhere, and I'd tell him everything, and he would tell him in Japanese as well, and that would all be written down. And I was knackered watching him writing, honestly. Like 2 dozen sheets of paper. But when we got back, he turned to me and he shook my hand and he said, thank you. Thank you. But he was second in the race. And I think he was second in the newcomers. And I think he was about 8th or 9th or something in the 400 race, something like that. He went on to the TT after that. But I actually did a bit of research on him. And he was quite a top man in the Macau Grand Prix 25 or 30 years ago. He's not a young man. He's a very experienced rider, but it was a great thing to be involved with somebody like that at the Manx. And this wouldn't happen years ago, where you've got a Spanish rider and a Japanese rider meeting in the paddock. Years ago, it was either English, Irish, Scots, Welsh, or Manxies. But these are our riders very often now who come to the correct way, I think, to learn the TT course at the Manx without the pressure of being a TT newcomer, you see. And then if they want to move on, because in lots of cases for overseas riders, it's a lot cheaper to do the TT. Might not be paying crack, but it's what they're going to do eventually because it's cheaper. But this was the case with them. Although Victor, I don't know if Victor would have done the Manx this year. Victor's a potential winner, and I want Victor to win that race, but he's had bad luck the last 2 years. But that's what that story was all about. I wasn't there. I wasn't present when that photograph was taken, but when I seen it, it struck a little chord with me. It just said a lot of the camaraderie of the overseas riders. Brilliant.
Lovely stuff. Great. So we've got a couple more comments I'm going to share with you boys, and then we're going to move on to a couple more stories. So we've got Sean Hogger saying, top men, eye up, yeses.
Yes. Hey, boy.
Yeah. Looking good from Liverpool, missing all my friends and family on the rock. Me too. I'm right there with you, Sean. John Hope said, you mentioned the Irish road races and the Manx races, very similar because of the camaraderie and unselfish attitude between competitors. That's why the Manx Grand Prix will continue for years to come. Pure competitive racing. That's not about the money. Thanks for these stories, guys. Nice. Thank you, John Hope.
Yeah.
Brian Spooner says, absolutely bloody marvellous, brilliant, Barry and Roy. Agreed.
Brian Spooner, top Manx Grand Prix man for many years. And I got a roasting of my landlady at Scarborough one time because he wanted some brand new leathers bringing back. And the landlady said, you're not bringing leathers into this house. Yeah. And I said, brand new. I don't care. And we got them in the end, but I thought, thanks very much, Brian.
There's a few garden houses in Scarborough, apparently, where they deal in leather. So I've heard.
I don't know what you mean by that, Roy. So I want to come to the John McEntee story, Barry. So I loved that popping up on the page about you going to the pub the other night and chatting to a family member, and it just struck a chord for you. So once again, you kind of randomly went for a pint, and you went in for a drink, and before you know it, you're having a chat about someone that you actually know a great story about. So fill us in a little bit on that. That'd be great.
Maybe I could set it off. Before Barry, John McEntee stopped down in Dennis Trollope, had the garage at the bottom of our lane, and I think he's related. I'm not sure whether it's Dennis Trollope's wife relation, John McEntee, but there is a connection. But he always rode for Fowlers, and Dennis Trollope looked after him. He was a goer, he was quick, but he wasn't, top 6 man probably, not possibly a winner. But we were in the commentary box at Ramsey, and the police were on duty with the hairdryer, pulling them in if they were doing 31. And they pulled this fella in, but just behind him was another who kind of sneaked out and came in and stopped, took his hat off, And I said, God, that's John McKenty. So I came out of the box and just, how you doing, John? All right? I said, who are you? He said, I'm doing the commentary. I said, I remember you from the lane and all that. He said, oh, I said, yeah. He said, I remember you now. He said, yeah, very good. So what are you doing over here? He said, oh, well, I think it's his daughter has got a job over here. And he said the family have moved over. So it's handy for me because this was no regulations then. He said, I'm stopping with them. He said, but my son-in-law, I think it was, he said, has just been pulled in by the police and they're just relieving him of some money for the police street because he was over the 30 mile an hour. So he said, I'm keeping out of the way because I was right behind him. And he said, it took me all my time to get anchored up when I saw what was happening. So that was the initial thing last year. And then we had the story, which Barry is going to relate now from last Saturday in a pub near you.
Well, yeah, I suppose at the TT or the Manx or anywhere, any time there's racing on, you'd expect people to walk into the pub and, you might not necessarily know them. You see, it's somebody who are not locals that you're all familiar with. And the other night I got talking to an old friend whose son raced for years. And then he said that the lad or the family who were in with him had moved to the Isle of Man, but his father raced in the Manx for years. And I said, well, who's that? He said his name was John McKenty. And straight away I said, well, there was an incident many years ago when he was a newcomer. I knew about this story, where two newcomers on the first or second night out collided at the bottom of Bagara, which is something which is an absolutely terrifying thought to happen, but they both got away with it. And this lad, Ian, he said straight away, my dad's mentioned that many a time. He said, and every time we drive past there, he tells you the story and shows you where he ended up and all this kind of thing. So it was nice to happen, but of course, once we'd had the conversation, I had to go home and dig the paper out. So I had to spine it. But he went on to be quite a good runner, John McKenty. And you were saying, Roy, they were down the bottom of the lane, weren't they? Trollops,
yeah.
Yeah, there's a story there. I don't know whatever happened to John Walsh. I don't know if he ever came back or not, but John McKenty did race for a few years after that.
Wayne Dinham, that was another. Did he go on to win?
Wayne Dinham won. Then he had a serious accident. Wayne Dinham was living in St. John's and at Ballydoyne. I know his son quite well. Pick him up in the taxi.
Yeah,
he's still around.
Still a bit.
Although he maybe gone back to Newport at the moment, but he was out Ballydoyne.
So, boys, we've got more comments again. Baz and B was getting a bit, there was a bit of banter going on before. We missed it a little bit. So our producer Aid was telling them to keep it clean. But Baz has said, you tell me to keep it clean. And Roy's talking about leather dealing in Scarborough. Well, you should just be nice.
Have you never bought a handbag?
Brilliant. So, boys, I want to come back to Barry, your very young birthday that you had yesterday, and you mentioned how it shared with the great Mr. Sutcliffe. So I'd love to touch on, I know, Roy, you've got a great list there of father and son competitors in the Grand Prix. And we got Ralph and Roger Sutcliffe, 60 and 80, I believe. There's a great picture there. Look at that. Brilliant.
Yeah. That was before we got too drunk a week last Saturday. But it was great to chat to Roger. I mean, I hadn't seen him for a long time. And like with all these, choose me words carefully, older people, once you get them yapping, you get so much information and health stories from them. And it was just good. I mean, I can remember Ralph winning. That was all my era kind of a thing. But Roger winning in 1970, that was the first year I can remember. And I think he won and he was third in the other race, I think I'm right in saying. I think he was third in the junior, something like that. And then he went on, he was good at the TT, he done well in the Southern 100. He was a prolific rider, but a modest man as well. But no, that was great to see, and they were delighted to pose for a pic. Good lads.
This came about actually about fathers and sons, daughters resident on the Isle of Man over the years, and obviously Roger came. He kind of stayed with this chap out at Hanley's Corner, called Bill Bancroft and renovated his house. And Ralph tells you some lovely stories about it. It was pretty primitive, like the way that they did it. It was putting the central heating in while in the middle of winter and stuff like that. But he came to the island and stopped and ran a very, very successful plumbing and heating business himself. And Ralph is involved in the building. And it might have been them or that, but they just said, well, how many can you kind of go through? So we made a list, and it wouldn't take long to run through them. Gary and Nigel Beattie, Tommy and Carl Bennett, Colin and Greg Broughton, Dennis Allen and Andy Brew, Eric and Richard Brigazzi, Peter and Lee Kane, Rob, Mark Colvin, Don and Richard Crossley, Billy and Connor Cummins, Eddie and Martin Crooks, Nick, Ryan and Callum Crowe, Sean and Callum Collister. Sean was a flyer. They had that memorable Manx Grand Prix battle where Richard Coates, Chris Farger and Sean Collister came out of Governor's Bridge in a lightweight race, and it was fractions of a second that they went over the line, and Chris Farger took it. But certainly there, Jimmy and Darren Creer, my near neighbour, the two Bob Doughties that we mentioned before, Paul and Brendan Farger, and all these will be bringing back memories of their campaigns on island circuits and courses. Paul and Gavin Hunt, Jim and Jack Hunter, who had that excellent program, with Jim the other night. How entertaining was that, Hailey? That was well. Bernie and Brian Lund, Paul Neal, Brian Neal, Dean Glenn, Nathan Harrison, Richard Dan, Ryan Neem, Paddy Leslie Martin, John, Hillary and Gail Musson, John and Dave Molyneux, Brian and Dave, and Chris Moffat, Richard Dave, Mark Madston Migdal, Terry Duncan and James Muir, Stephen and his son, and Darren Sluice and Jason Crow, Roger and Ralph Sutcliffe, there they are, Dave, Rob, and Carolyn Sells, who was part of that as well. Right. And, John and Robert Smith, Tony and Rob Temple, and Brian and Tim Venables, both of whom have been Manx Grand Prix winners. So it's quite a comprehensive list.
It's quite special, isn't it? And Nathan Harrison's dedicating his lap, isn't he, to Roger for the Manx Grand Prix celebration, the one that Jim Hunt is doing.
I believe so.
So love that, brilliant, boys. So just to we want to move on to that classic TT celebration lap. So what an amazing achievement, Jim. What amazing event that Jim's put together, getting all these people from all over the world celebrating our great event and doing a lap of the TT course, so 37 and a quarter miles, right? Yeah. And we've got the great John Caldwell doing it in honor of you two boys and your dedication to the sport, to the event, etc. So we tried to get him to join us, but he had meetings online this evening, so he couldn't join us, sadly. But
the boss must have got a hold of him, did he?
Yeah, they did.
That photograph was he kind of took me by surprise, really, by saying, for whatever reason, he felt as though over the years we'd made a contribution by various ways of to raise funds for various people connected with motorbikes, and probably the main one that stood out would be the HOG Ambulance Fund, and certainly 30 years, I think, Sean and the family, and I got dragged in, and if I wasn't available, my son was available, so I think we had a 30-year association with it, and I was quite taken aback with it, really. I did my lap in memory of Alan Bud Jackson, who's been already mentioned. I didn't borrow the leathers that he won in 1986. But the Reverend, I said, when you do your lap, he said, I'll follow you around. And he just told me on Saturday morning that he'd set off and that he was heading round and hoped to be somewhere near the grandstand at 10 o'clock. So I got the phaser out and I went in the reverse direction and picked him up just at Kerramore. No, it wasn't Kerramore, it was Glen Tramon, actually. So I spun round and then just kept ahead of him. We took a few at the Ramsey hairpin for obvious reasons. We then went up to the Gooseneck. We stopped at Joey's and had a natter, and then the Bungalow, and then Craignabar, and then obviously coming down the road. But I think that's Nick Fair that's just gone over the line.
Oh, really?
The trike viewers are just lined up, and they do a terrific job because they really do give an insight into the history on a lap. I mean, you pay the going rate for it, but you really do get entertained. And of course, the Reverend was heading down. Some woman in a car had nearly written him off at Governor's Bridge by shooting out of the dip in reverse direction at a great rate of knots. But there he is at the gooseneck, just accelerating away from the gooseneck.
His heart would be sinking at that point, I think, because it gets easier. Fair play to him. He did very, very well. I think he's around the same age as me, and I couldn't do that physically nowadays, to be honest with you.
There he is at Ramsey. Tight to the
How long
bank.
did it actually?
Here comes into Ramsey now, Reverend John Caldwell, down through the back. Stella Maris, down 1, down 2, down 3, takes it tight into the wall on the inside and round, and he's gone. And watch those damp patches on the way to the waterworks, John.
And don't forget, 48 miles an hour.
Yeah, 48 miles.
48 miles an hour. Yeah, it's pretty good. That. Yeah.
Lunatic.
There's the steel.
How long did it take him? What was his total time of doing the lap?
He averaged 13 miles an hour, which
Wow.
is pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah.
He did tell us the time. I can't just remember it.
I know the outright lap record on a push bike, unaided, with no electronic equipment on it, was held by Chris Boardman, and it was an easy number to get. It was 1 hour, 23 minutes, 34 seconds, nearly 1, 2, 3, 4 on the end. But that's been superseded now by a local lad called Peter Kenyuk, who took a few seconds off it. And you won't believe, even with John averaging 13 miles an hour and me on the phaser, not going daft, but having to keep ahead of him, stop, take the gloves off, take the helmet off, get the camera out, set it up and all that. It really is amazing because John Watterson, the man who's taken so many TT and Manx Grand Prix photographs as well, tried to follow Chris Boardman on that lap and he couldn't keep ahead of him. He couldn't get stopped on his motorbike and get him ready. He was gone. And the only time that any photographs of any significance was on the spell from the gooseneck to probably the mountain box where he was slowed down a bit by the incline.
Get ahead of him.
But then coming down to Craignabar, even they used to hold 3 bicycle races round the TT mountain course. The Manx International for international teams, the Viking Trophy over 2 laps, and the Man and Veg over 1. And the boys in the cars clocking them going down into Craignabar. It wasn't unusual to see 60 and 65 mile an hour.
That's right.
Into the Craig and then getting anchored up and then down and getting a similar speed then down. They've never used the new Brandish. They had to slow down for Brandish to get round. The bicycle races have never been round the new Brandish corner, but if they did do now, I'm sure they would get possibly a bit more speed than that from the Craig down through to Hilbury. Unbelievable, really. Unbelievable.
So, boys, before we close the show off, I've got to share some of the questions. We had quite a few questions coming here that we haven't managed to do yet. So let's get going through them if you don't mind. We've got Terence Cartwright's asking question for both of you, Roy and Barry. What is the chances of you both getting a book published? Would you both have, because you must have both so much between the two of you to inspire others. We agree. We want you to.
It's more fun up the pub having a chat.
Yeah.
It's a lot more straightforward. A lot of people have said this to me, and yes, it would be nice to write something down. But unfortunately, in my case, the day job takes up a lot of my time, like 60, 70 hours a week working. And by the time I haven't got time to do that. Maybe someday I might do something. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, Roy has a bit more time than me.
Oh yeah, yeah. Got a dog to walk and a grandchild to look after. Various other things. We are cutting back, but in all honesty, I really did enjoy reading Frank Fox's book, because I imagined I spoke to him many, many times through Alan Phillips, who was another Manx Grand Prix competitor, and they were big mates together. And I can picture Frank, and I was reading it in my mind, but I was speaking it as he would have been describing it.
Yeah.
And a true Yorkshireman, like, and it just made it so entertaining. But there's nothing better than doing this, what we're doing, and maybe having a bit of time to put it on the site, and you get it wrong. Nobody's perfect, are they? You make mistakes.
I think sometimes like this, you can see people are real people. You're not hiding behind a laptop or whatever it is. You know, I've known other people who wrote books, and you think they're quite amiable, but in real life, they're not really like that. My mum had a book from a former school teacher, and this, I mentioned no names here, but she came across as quite a chatty, friendly person. But in real life, it wasn't actually like that, you know. So make the most of this while you can.
Yeah,
I would say I wouldn't have time to write a book, Sarah, to be honest with you. Sorry.
I'll come and sit next to you at the pub, Barry, and we can do it audibly. I'll start recording it for you after a few pints.
Because I'm sat in the taxi for long hours, people say, well, just talk to yourself and tape yourself and do it another time. But I can't possibly do that. I'm too much of a people watch. There's always some skeet outside somewhere. I'm concentrating on that. Although if I do drive around, like I'd done my 2 laps early yesterday morning in the car, but like for the Jim Hunter thing, and I never stopped yapping the whole time to myself. So I do have some serious problems. I maybe should have taped that conversation.
Likewise, me on the bike. By God, if you came up to the cat and talked and sat next to Barry, it would do his street cred the world of good, Hailey.
Brilliant. So just got a couple more questions, boys, before we move on. We've got a video to show at the end, a Manx Grand Prix video. We've got where is it? Oh yeah, Martin Edwards is asking, do the riders still stop at Gwen Crowling's house, great lady who helped the Manx Grand Prix? Crowling's house.
No, well, Gwen passed on quite a number of years ago now. I think that the lady who was in there, I don't know if she's still in there or not, was Janet Thurlow, who's a Manx girl from Kirkmichael. Her husband, Dave Thurlow, raced in the Manx for years. I don't know if Janet's still in there or not, to be honest with you. If she is, then that's where people will probably go. If she's not, I know when they used to have the coach trips going around and things, they would be stopping. Then after Gwen went, they would stop at the Sulby Glen, where Rosie would look after them very well, and there'd be something going on there. But you know, Gwen's old house does have a plaque up on the outside that says Gwen's. I actually stopped the Gwen's in 1992 lightweight race. It was pouring rain. My bike stopped on Black Bridge and it wouldn't restart, and I pushed all the way to Gwen's in the rain, and I thought, that's it, you know. And Gwen says, get in there and get something. And I'd never seen a spread like it. It was like going to your work's New Year's do or something like that. There was everything you could have wanted. And that was one of the most surreal experiences ever. Was sitting inside Gwen's house with a load of sandwiches, crisps, pop, cakes, watching the bikes going past outside in the pouring rain in a race you had been in 15 minutes previously. That was quite bizarre. Mark Baldwin, that race, yeah.
If only, there's so many of the houses and the farms around the course, aren't there, that open themselves up to the public coming in and using the land to watch the races. They make sandwiches, they make cakes. Some of the stories they must have as well to tell. Be incredible to get down.
Absolutely, and lots of those people would have generations from the same family or friends. But certainly when the Clips course went up Waterson Lane, Williston in the early 50s, my grandmother lived across the road and people were sat on the hedge, and she spent the whole day making tea and toast and cakes, and you know, well, you can come and use the toilet if you want to. Money was never mentioned. That wasn't important. What was important was that and she'd be saying to me, go and ask that lady in the black coat, what does she want, sugar and all this. But that's the way Manx people were. You know, and I think that's the case with lots of country people. A friend of mine went out one night to out by Untitled Chapter, if you know it, Hailey, coming up from Sarah's Cottage.
Yeah.
And he went straight from work. He had no time for any tea. So we got in behind this great pillar and he thought, I hope I'm all right here. And this old fella come out and he thought, oh, here we go. I'm going to get shipped out now. And this old fella said, how you doing, then? He said, have you had any tea? I know he said, you want a cup of tea? So he goes, I'm not getting tea. He said, I'll have a cup of tea. Thank you very much. So the old fella said to him, did you get something to eat, did you? He said, well, I just come straight from work. He said, I've never been out here watching before. Oh, he said, I've got a pot of broth on here. So we got 2 big pots of broth, right? He had tea all night. And at the end of the night, he said, come back here any time to watch, he said. You're very, very welcome. So compare that to some other stories you hear. That was the old Manx way of doing things. That's the way we've always been. And long may it continue.
Fantastic.
As long as anybody living on the TT coast doesn't is Japanese, you'll be all right, Barry.
Yeah. Well, we survived, you know. But yeah, there probably is Japanese people living on the TT coast now, I suppose. It's
more than likely.
Everybody else, like.
So Fireblade Phil Nelms is saying the law states that you both got to write a book. Agreed. We're going to get it going.
I never had great respect for the law, Phil Fireblade Nelms.
Yeah.
That revelation that you were doing 110 outside the Crescent on the promenade.
Long time ago.
Oh, great. And then we've got Adrian Kershaw says, nice to hear Roy's voice. I've missed the commentary this year. Hope we are racing again next year on the Isle of Man. All the best, Adrian. I agree. And Carlos, thanks for a great show, Hailey, Barry and Roy, and the producer who told us off. Brilliant stuff again. We could do a whole show about Gwen memories. Yeah, that would be great to do. So, boys, we've got this Manx Grand Prix video we're going to show before you leave us. We want to get your reactions after, if that's all right. So enjoy this quick video. Then we'll come back before I say our goodbyes.
We'll have to get the class.
The Isle of Man. Every year for a brief period, roads are closed, the air is tainted by high-octane petrol, and the peaceful island becomes the Isle of Speed. It's TT time. Senior, junior, lightweight. These are the categories the men in riding leathers of their highly tuned machines do battle in. This was 37 and 3.
Doesn't matter which class, which race you've been doing all.
Tortuous laps. The race was on. Benfield on a 344 Air Mackie. Morgan, 344 Greens. Warner, another Air Mackie. Number 19, Kirk, well into his stride. The lusty roar and crackle of finely tuned machines going at full bore echoed round the island. Speeds were well into 3 figures. At 71, Robin Duffy was going faster than anyone else. Conditions were ideal for racing.
Yeah.
Were peeling off. As the checkered flag drew closer, riders urged themselves and their machines to get every last fraction of speed. Duffy was still out in front, but there was some real heroism going on. Riding into third place was Clive Brown, steering locked on. Under an average of 92.31, victory belongs to Robin Duffy.
What is your plan B?
How cool is that?
Excellent, yes, excellent. 69 junior, Robin Duffy. Well, my great friend, who I did me laps for, Danny Sherman, Danny was dating for the lead in that race, and he came off late on at the Brandywell, and he got back on again, and he finished 4th place, but he got the fast. I think I'm right in saying that.
Yeah, probably would do.
Yeah.
I tell you.
Yeah, so it's just funny that you actually hit on that race, and we had a bit of personal.
He was riding for Derek Woodman at the time, wasn't he, on the Air Mackie?
He was on the Air Mackie. He was on the Air Mackie.
Slid off, and the marshals went over, and Danny being Danny, I went to school with Danny. Great great personality, great person at school, and continued all his life until tragic incident at Greba Castle. But certainly, yeah, the marshals came over and said, well, that's it, like, you're finished now. And he kind of shoved them to one side, and he hadn't done too much damage and fired it up again. But I didn't realise he'd finished fourth in that.
Yeah, back in those, well, even until comparatively recent time, you could get away with the likes of that. It couldn't happen now.
No.
You know, which is quite rightly so, because, I mean, there's been cases of broken brake levers and things, and people fell off and got going again with the adrenaline, discover all of a sudden that the brake lever fractures or something when they need it, and lots of other things as well. But 69 was just the year before I can really say I remembered it well. 1970, I saw all that. I saw Roger Sutcliffe's win. Some great footage there, some great old bikes. And I was just saying to Roy as well that the Manx Grand Prix used to employ the old back numbers, but it was yellow back numbers for whichever race you were in.
No change in colour.
No. Whereas in the TT, the senior had yellow back numbers, the junior had blue, the lightweight had green, and so on.
Red at times for the senior one.
It was in the early days, yeah. Certainly when Surtees and McIntyre, that was red plates, and even after that. But at the Manx to be yellow, but you never see that now.
YELLER.
Yellow. Well,
right, boys, thank you so much once again for joining us. I can't wait to get you back on. I could just listen to you for hours and hours, as could everybody else on here commenting, saying thank you. Good crack, lads. Brilliant. Right, yeses.
Hi.
Have a great evening. Thank you.
See you next time.
Absolutely. We see you very soon. Take care, boys. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
As they say in that good old Manx saying, if I wasn't here, I'd be somewhere else. You a good night. Back to the grandstand.
Cheers, boys. Thanks everyone for tuning in to this interactive experience. Thanks for all your questions, your comments. We really appreciate it. Remember, you can join us in this virtual studio. So when we do get the boys back on again, if you want to come and join us and ask them a question, feel free to do so. Just send us a little message and we'll let you know how we can get you set up. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us for our coverage for the Classic and Manx Grand Prix. I'm Hailey Coxon, and this is the Spirit of Motorsport TV.
The Isle of Man. Every year for a brief period, roads are closed, the air is tainted by high-octane petrol, and the peaceful island becomes the Isle of Speed. It's TT time. Senior, junior, lightweight. These are the categories the men in riding leathers and their highly tuned machines do battle in. This was the course, 37 3/4 miles of difficult riding. For the junior racers, 6 tortuous laps. The race was on. Benfield on a 344 Air Mackie. Morgan, 344 Greaves. Warner, another Air Mackie. Number 19, Kirk, well into his stride. The lusty roar and crackle of finely tuned machines going at full bore echoed round the island. Speeds were well into 3 figures. But 71, Robin Duffy was going faster than anyone else. Conditions were ideal for racing. Laps were peeling off. As the checkered flag grew closer, riders urged themselves and their machines to get every last fraction of speed. Duffy was still out in front, but there was some real heroism going on. Riding in the third place was Clive Brown, steering locked on. But at an average of 92.31, victory belonged to Robin Duffy.